Hey, podcast listeners. Welcome back. This is now part 2 of our episode where we go deep into the outdoor cat, feral cat, cat control literature. We hope you enjoy.
What we've seen in the past 30-odd years is a move towards what gets called the no-kill solutions. So you have shelters saying, okay, we won't kill, people squabble over the term euthanasia, but we won't put down unadoptable animals like we used to make space for the ones that are adoptable, then we can find them owners at least. We'll make shelters no-kill. We'll try to get localities to adopt no-kill strategies. And so then the problem is once you stop killing the ones that have trouble finding new homes, then you run out of space. And then so it goes hand in hand with then leaving more of them on the street outside. And so then a very well-meaning next step is, okay, well, at least if we neuter all of them, they can't have more babies, right? That should work. And so then we end up with the pros and cons of that. People like me and Tony would look at that and say, that's great. They may not be reproducing. In the most ideal scenarios, maybe the population will just die out from attrition because you're not replacing it themselves. But in the meantime, they're killing lots of stuff. And then there's a question of whether that actually works in the real world to just neuter as many as you can while you're feeding them outside. And that's what we got next is a pile of articles about this stuff. And so the stuff that Tony gets on his Facebook threads tends to be the same list over and over again. And it's coming out of an advocacy group called Alley Cat Allies, and they have their fact sheets about TNR, trap, neuter, release. Let's not discuss their fact sheet overall. I'll just say that we're pulling these articles now from their fact sheet and from other stuff but we're trying to be fair by looking at sort of the fundamental articles in favor of TNR, trap, neuter, release. And I'll say that a lot of my overall characterization or overall comment when I look at these is a lot of them seem to happen on college campuses. There are places where it would seem relatively easy to control a population of cats because your space is defined in a way that isn't so much in just like the neighborhoods of West Philly or something like that, and that you've got students who have flexible schedules and can organize into clubs to take care of these cats in ways that are more intensive than just people doing what they can after work after they put the kids to bed, and so I don't see the university studies as generalizable in a useful way, but we're going to get into all that. So the one I still wanted to start with, for me, is actually the most interesting one there are a lot of interesting ones. One of the more interesting ones for big cities, because this looked at a whole bunch of colonies in Rome, Italy, very big city. Management of feral domestic cats in the urban environment of Rome, Italy. In preventive veterinary medicine, there's a bunch of authors. I'm going to say Natoli et al. and spare all these wonderful Italian people my slaughtering of their names. But basically looked at population trends in cat colonies in Rome over 9 years, starting with about 1,600 cats in 1991, down to about 1,300 cats in 2000 in these particular colonies, and where you had dedicated caretakers, dedicated trapping and neutering before re-releasing. And frankly, this gets listed as a success.
It does, but let's talk about the last line of the abstract.
I know, hit it. I was going to read it, but you go ahead.
This suggests that all these efforts without an effective education of people to control the reproduction of house cats as a prevention for abandonment are a waste of money, time, and energy.
And unfortunately, I'm going to comment later that I think this also applies to trapping and killing, but that what they're saying is in a big city with a lot of people releasing cats and having their pet cats breed, you can neuter as many as you want. It's going to be hard to really shrink the population.
Some of the studies that we're going to talk about, one of them does say, I forget which one, that it's is less effort to do TNR than euthanasia. The assumption is that the way that you euthanize them is by trapping them and then is injecting.
I know where you're going now.
And the thing is what about the
how would you kill them, Tony?
of Ruger 1022 with a suppressor? Like that's how you do it. You don't trap them, you bait them, and then you shoot them.
A little hard to do in West Philly,
right? But like that's how you do it.
Or maybe in Rome. It's a
And that's how
density, man.
it's-
You don't want
the
people
thing
with
is-
rifle bullets flying all over Rome.
I tell you what, though, this is done. It is done a lot. It's just that no one can do a study like that because people would flip out if you're killing cats. You know, like the one who's
No,
gonna
but you've actually brought up an important point because one of the rhetorical lines that you get from the outdoor cat loving community is that we've tried trapping and killing, it doesn't work. We've got modeling studies we're going to look at, but you can't find anyone who's actually done a study where they say, here's 40 colonies, we're going to take 20 of them, trap them and kill them, we're going to take the other 20, trap and neuter them, try this for 10 years, see what happens.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's
It just
like,
isn't done.
If
You know why?
Because they never go away.
Because universities have anything that has a backbone has an animal protocol
Right.
thing and has to be approved, and that no one's going to propose that.
there
Yeah.
are
Even though that's the work that needs to be done.
And even though that's the state of the art that's being done anyway.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
so
Right.
many wildlife refuges and wildlife management areas and large parcels of private land that are completely cat free because people patrol it with a 22
Yeah.
and they don't want to talk about that.
So, anyways, let's talk about the Rome study real quick. Any other thoughts on it?
While I appreciated the bravado of the final sentence of the abstract, I think that, in my opinion, that they overstepped a little bit there, but it does. I mean, they soften it by saying suggest instead of this does. These efforts are, and they're notoriously Italian in that regard. I would say my Italian colleagues are all much more likely to think that they're saving the world as they they have a bravado about them, and their scientists do. It's really funny, but anyway, it's interesting that one of the things that I thought was really key in this is that they do see that the neutering can work, but it takes 3 years before it really has any kind of an effect. So 3 years after the neutering date, and it's also time consuming and very expensive. Right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I pulled up and just remembered from a few years ago when we adopted a dog from the ACCT and over in
The animal
North
control
Philly.
for Philadelphia.
Yeah, right. The animal control for Philadelphia. That they take in that year. They had taken in 30-some thousand animals, and a third of those were dogs, and 80% of those were bull terrier mixes of some sort.
The sweet pit bull mix. you always
Yes.
see
Yeah.
advertised,
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's what we brought home. And Polly was a great dog. But anyway, the 20,000 animals were cats.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're here now talking about a cat problem in Philadelphia, right? I mean, like, this is what sparks this, right? We see it happening. We know it's happening, right? We can, like I said, I'm going to see a cat probably walking the half block back to my car. It's shocking when you think about that level of numbers and what kind of
No, the
You know.
estimates are something like 300,000 unowned cats in Philadelphia.
right, which is a pretty large portion of the living population of Philadelphia.
So the next one we want to talk about is actually it's kind of the study in the TNR world. This is one that you see, or we will see cited a lot. It is called the Evaluation of the Effect of a Long-Term Trap, Neuter, Return, and Adoption Program on a Free-Roaming Cat Population. This is by Julie Levy, David Gale, and Leslie Gale. And this was published in JAVMA, the Journal of the American Veterinary Medicine Association. You'll see Julie Levy's name pop up a lot. She's a major researcher, but also proponent of trap neuter release. And this study basically around Gainesville, Florida. Again, university at the core of it, University of Florida. And this one gets cited a lot as a major success of trap neuter release. And the numbers, to run through them real quick, this is from 1991 to 2002. Sorry, I think 200 odd original cats. 47% of which removed for adoption, 11% euthanized, 15% disappeared. But 15% disappeared, 6% accounted for dead, and then 6% moved into the wooded environment, and then 15% remaining for a long time. And so I know in Cat Wars, Pete Mara lays into this one saying this isn't about TNR, this is about adoption, euthanization, and then a lot of the rest of them dying ugly deaths.
Yeah, I mean, it's really strange, like, research design. You know what I mean? It's
Well,
like, let's just look at everything.
Well,
But that's really what people do in these things. They don't just neuter and release them. They do try to pull out the ones they can adopt.
right. This is one of those studies that is likely to succeed because, in my opinion, you have an autocorrelation there between decreasing cat numbers, and what you've done is you've effectively removed them from the population. There's a relatively small number that's going back out, right?
Yeah.
And then they had a large number that were adopted and they went to other homes and they were taken outside the area. And so this is not really it's a much stronger advocate for catching the cats and giving them to someone to keep in a house is what it really
But
is.
wouldn't it,
Which we're quite fine
in
with.
terms
Right,
of
right, of course,
But-
right.
in terms of using this as an example of effective solutions, there would be no difference if that cat was euthanized or adopted in the purposes of the study, right?
Right, that's right.
And so,
It depends. This is actually important. It depends on your goal. I mean, I think we look at this and say our goal is the elimination of that outdoor cat population. Whereas I think a lot of the people who are doing this are taking care of the cats, their goal is alleviation of cat suffering and prolonging cat lives.
Right.
And so they have very different goals than we do, and so these studies get evaluated or get read in very different ways depending what our goals are.
but this study is used to counter people who want to, at least at the very least include euthanasia as a possible solution.
Right,
And they're
and so-
like,
so
it
we're-
doesn't
we're-
work. Vacuum effect, and you're like, well, wouldn't the vacuum effect apply to adoption? Is
Well, we're gonna
the
get
same
into the
way
vacuum
as it
effect
would
a little bit later.
to euthanization?
But this one, I'm looking at like 58% of the cats were removed or killed immediately, like just by human action.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a pretty big chunk you're pulling out of there. This is another one of these ones where you have a relatively confined cat population, a veterinary school, volunteers, etc. And so a lot of factors that don't necessarily apply to some guy at the end of the block feeding cats in the alley and doing his best to trap a few of them.
Well, I mean, I think this is one of those places where the authors of the study were spinning it in such a way that focuses on the trap, neuter, return side of it, when really the adoption and euthanasia side is the actual more important part.
Most
of
of
the
what
story.
they did was that.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. So, so of course, if you remove cats from a population and sustain that removal, there are going to be no cats. If we look at the other studies where they do trap, neuter, return, one of the things that you see that's the most striking change to me was demography changes. So those are age classes, right? So you see a significantly lower number of kittens and things.
That's in the South African one we're going to
Right,
get to.
right.
Yeah.
But then it frees up food, and so cats are healthier and they live longer, and so the number of adult cats in the area stays high, and the relative abundance doesn't really change all that much. And so in a way, that's a vacuum effect, right? Other cats they're not immigrating into the population, but they are staying. It's just like an aging population in the United States. Our demography's flip-flop now, where we're very top-heavy in older generation and older people. And so it's exactly the same way.
If you have lower turnover.
You've cut down fertility rates, but you've freed resources up for stray cats that allow for more cats to survive and stay healthy, which means they're going to last longer in the natural environment. So I think that this was a really well spun article from someone who's clearly tipping her data towards a certain end goal, in my opinion.
The next one, let's look at.
This is the simulation, right? Estimation of effectiveness of 3 methods of feral cat population control by use of a simulation model.
That is. Thank you for reading the title.
Yeah, sure.
By McCarthy, Levine, and Reed. And this was also in the Journal of the American Veterinary Medical, JAVMA again. We're getting into modeling because, like we said, people don't do direct comparisons between trapping and removal versus trapping, neutering, and returning. This is one that I found really interesting because they look at what if you don't neuter them exactly? What if you just give them vasectomies and don't you basically tie their tubes instead of pulling out their ovaries or pulling out their testicles. It's like you leave them hormonally intact even though they're sterile.
Yeah.
And so first I'll comment that is socially impossible. That like what people complain about in terms of cats is them yowling and screaming and peeing on everything. It's one of the things you get when you neuter a male cat is it's not going to spray on everything and it's not going to be outside yowling. So setting that aside, it's interesting because you have that you're comparing different ways of you're comparing that vasectomy. I don't know. They use a long acronym TVHR, I think. Mm-hmm. And comparing that with trapping and removing and trapping and neutering, they say that comparing them that you have to get a really high capture percentage for trap neuter release to work. Vasectomying the cats, leaving them hormonally intact, would do better at shrinking the colonies. And the reasons are fascinating to me, that when you totally neuter them, that you reduce mortality of adult male cats because they don't wander as much, they don't fight as much. You reduce the mortality of the adult females because they reproduce less and are just under less stress from their reproductive cycles. You increase the kitten survival of whatever kittens are born in the colony because the other cats tolerate kittens better. And so I guess reading into this that adult male cats will kill kittens that they find if they're trying to. This is something I'm inferring from like knowing about other animals that like you realize like lions, they'll kill babies to bring the females back into heat so they can reproduce with them.
Hey, podcast listeners. I'm going to drop in another reference to an article we didn't get to discuss, but which this McCarthy et al. Article references, which is demographic differences between urban feeding groups of neutered and sexually intact free-roaming cats following trap-neuter return procedure by Gunther, Finkler, and Turkel from the Journal of the American Veterinary Medical Association. This is in May 2011. This article described the results of sort of an experiment of taking 4 cat colonies, leaving 2 of them totally unneutered, neutering as many cats as they could in the other 2 colonies, and comparing the results. So what we're discussing in terms of the way that cats survive or don't survive, and that kitten survival rates, that kind of stuff, a lot of that is drawn from this article that I'm dropping in here. Now back to the discussion.
It's all kind of brutal.
Yeah.
You're sort of saying that the more effective, but it's kind of...
Well, they kill the genes of other males.
Yeah.
That's basically what they're doing. Right?
Yeah.
To make sure theirs make it.
So it's basically modeling and saying, hey guys, the trapping and removing actually would work better than TNR, and then this other method would work better than TNR, at least how they're modeling it. I don't know. What do you guys think of this?
I struggled with this one a little bit because the description of the models. The thing that I found interesting in them was that there doesn't seem to be a strong basis in some of the fact, but it is rather fascinating that basically they take mates out of rotation. Basically, they take males out of rotation, and it leads to higher reproductive decline among them. And so the idea of that makes sense to me. That nature has a way of regulating populations, right? I mean, that's what, and so letting, as a person who studies ecology, it's always best to try to mimic what nature does in a way.
Yeah.
And so if you let things sort of jive with nature, then they have a way of working themselves out. And it seems like this hierarchical structure is a really strong. It's a significant.
So the dominant male cats
makes a big difference.
Will muscle out other cats.
That's right.
And even if you have your dominant male cats hormonally intact but sterile,
right.
then they'll muscle out cats that might actually be fertile.
Yeah.
But just not dominant.
It's a real monkey wrench in the whole plan there by having them sterilized. So
you sort of have them in there like suppressing other reproduction.
Yeah, it really is interesting.
And doing as much mating as they want to mate because they can't. They're shooting blanks.
Yeah, and you've introduced a new you've introduced a second regulatory mechanism that you don't currently have.
Yeah.
Right. So, and actually one that you're disrupting in most cases if you take cats out of the population like that.
And I will return to my point that this is fascinating, but if you have all these cats yowling and spraying everywhere, people are going to be really pissed off about it. This next one was in +1. Is that how you say it, plus or PLOS?
PLOS, the Public Library of Science.
When I've heard people say, they say PLOS.
PLOS. Some people say PLOS.
Yeah.
Two ways to say it the way I didn't say it.
That's
All right. So, simulating free-roaming cat population management options in open demographic environments by, again, long list of authors. Miller et al. I'll point out that Julia Levy's in this one also, as well as Felicia Nutter, who is another person who pops up a lot in the TNR literature. This is another modeling one, comparing trapping and releasing to trap neutering and releasing, and sort of saying that if you can isolate a population, then trapping and removing would seem to work better or faster than trapping and neutering and releasing them, which just to me makes intuitive sense. If you don't have any more cats coming in, then removing the cats would be faster at reducing the population than leaving the cats. But then that connectivity, sort of like the ability of new cats to move in, screws with either method. I find this disheartening in general, that like we might be squabbling about or fighting about sort of what's the best way to control cats. Should we take them out and kill them, or should we or just leave them and neuter them? And the answer might be that neither works very well. This is kind of the conclusion of the Rome article. Like, if people keep dumping their cats,
Right.
Well,
you know?
the thing is that no one wants to talk about is euthanasia in situ. Don't put them in trap them and then take them to a vet and inject them, shoot them in the field.
But you can't shoot enough of them, maybe. Like, this is the thing, like,
I think you can.
even here, I mean, like, or like on the edge of the Wissahickon or something like that, or the edge of Cobb's Creek. I don't know, man. Like,
It's certainly a thing that needs to be on the table. And here's the other thing about, just like one of the arguments that we say is that if you have TNR in these areas where cats are cared for, then it encourages people to dump.
there's a whole social dimension of it, yeah.
Right. Well, people will intentionally drop their cats there. They'll attract cats. You know, as in the people who
Yeah, but you're
abandon
actually
them.
giving me a segue here. One of the things I want to say.
So what about what no one wants to talk about is the other one is that if people know that an abandoned cat may end up dead, it'll be a deterrent to drop it to
Let's just go Roman about it. Let's post dead cats high up for everyone to see.
right. But
Sorry.
like, you know, if it's part of, you know, if it's a clear
No, I
option that
know.
like this cat you might be euthanized if it's caught in the field,
You
then
leave Fluffy here, Fluffy dies.
right, then
Yeah,
people aren't
aren't
going
going to drop
Yeah.
Fluffy. Maybe. I was going to say that what I take away is partly there's a cost element in my mind. I'm trained more in the social sciences than I am in the natural sciences. I look at it and I'm like, well, how much are we spending, whether it's volunteer time, donated stuff, on maintaining outdoor cats? And if we just stopped doing that and spent the money on just like spaying every cat we can, like just like knock on people's doors, and you got a cat, we can do it right now, bring it out, you know, that would be more effective, you know, and a better use of dollars, taxpayer dollars, philanthropic dollars, whatever.
I hear you, and I agree. Just one of the things that we're dealing with is the normalization of no kill, right?
Yeah.
The normalization of TNR, the normalization of community cats.
Yeah.
Right? Like Alley Cat Allies, which we'll get into next, but in my opinion is analogous to the Heartland Institute. They are a misinformation factory.
That they are.
And they're winning. They're getting TNR.
Well, that's a rhetorical. You're right, but I think there's a whole PR question, which
And cats. This is an ecological issue with hemisphere-wide implications when it comes to migratory birds, and this cannot be hijacked by an emotionally irrational small group of people. These decisions need to be made by wildlife agencies, and all the options need to be on the table.
So I want to get through the rest of the study. We have a few more left that are mainly modeling ones. There was one about managing feral cats on a university campus. It's called Managing Feral Cats on a University's Campuses. How many are there, and is sterilization having an effect? By Amanda Jones and Colleen Downs in the Journal of Applied Animal Welfare Science. It's another one that gets cited on the pro-TNR side. This is one, Clint, you talked about a little bit before, where you see shifting demographic in cat colonies. You want to talk about it really quick?
Yeah, sure. So this is where they saw a reduction in cat populations with, I guess they used TNR, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they used TNR, but they were modest. They were not. They were like 8%, maybe something like that. It was relatively low.
Not huge.
I think.
Yeah.
And then, but one of the striking things that I said is that earlier is that the demographics of the populations changed significantly. So you see a much higher percentage of adult cats in the places where there's sterilization than you do in the populations where they've done none. It's really interesting to me. And if you go back and you look at the other data that we see too, it took 3 years for neutered cats to have an effect, for neutering to start having an effect where the cat would last 3 more years past that. So I guess is that maybe the average time for a wild cat, a feral cat. And so it's basically freeing up resources, right? So you have every environment has a carrying capacity for the number of individuals that it can sustain.
And that could be defined by how much cat food gets put in bowls.
By how much cat food, how much prey there is, all of those factors, climate, a number of things. But what you're definitely seeing here is that a release of resources like this, and this is largely ubiquitous across the entire biological world, right? Is that when more resources become available, populations grow, and then as resources decline, they decline, and then they they sort of vary around a carrying capacity for that population. And actually, anecdotally, I have a friend that's a wildlife biologist with the DNR in West Virginia, and she's a large mammologist, and so she studies deer populations. And one of the things that they see is if they double the deer kill in a single year, the next year the reproductive rates of the does goes up by 100%.
Because they got more to eat.
They recover almost immediately, and white-tailed deer are actually apparently will they will twin instead of having singletons when resources availability is high. So as soon as you do it, they basically just recover immediately. And so management techniques are really difficult on that. Now, I was actually comparing some of this to thinking about that. I just was looking at data for Valley Forge National Historical Park, and they are doing a deer management program there.
For several years,
right? They have been. They still are. It's continual, and that's an interesting part of the story is that they've effectively managed it back to the level they want. Although they are on the high end of their what they want it to be, but they can't stop because
the neighborhoods around there are full of deer.
Right,
also.
Everything's full of deer. So. But if you keep killing them, right? If they keep taking them out, and
you can keep them at a manageable level, right?
It's right. You can maintain them, and I was thinking about this when Tony said the best way to do this is to shoot and kill them in place and leave them there. so you can leave them as a message to the other cats in the neighborhood. But anyway, but you can't. So who's going to do that, right? So who keeps doing that over and over again? And I think what we just continually keep seeing with this literature is that. If you think about the feral cat population as a bathtub, right, and you're filling it with water, and the water is the cats, the drain is not the answer. The spigot is the issue, right? That's where you need to turn it off. We need to stop getting these cats coming into these things.
Yeah.
And then these techniques, if we could stop on that end, and on the influx of new cats to the populations, then these other management techniques will be far more effective than they have been, and that we've seen in all of the literature.
So,
the other thing is we also have to stop inputting resources to these
Stop
cats.
feeding them.
Have to stop
Well,
feeding
that's
them.
right. That's
Yeah.
right.
And we have to stop sheltering them. We have to, and that, to me, is a cultural issue because TNR advocacy seems to be going hand in hand with feeding cats and sheltering them. You know, and they'll argue that you need to get them accustomed to people so you can trap them.
Yeah.
But then the same poster from Alley Cat Allies says that these cats can't be socialized and therefore they can't be adopted. So, I mean, it makes no sense.
Or they'll refer to them as wild and talk
Right.
about them, argue that they have a place in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I
Then
mean,
you
it's
shouldn't-
whatever they use,
then you
whatever
shouldn't have
argument,
to feed them.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Then you shouldn't have to feed them. So to me, it seems like at the very least, stop getting new cats in, and part of that to me is get rid of no-kill shelters because then that's one of the main reasons cats get dumped is because you can't bring them to a shelter. People who have cats that don't want them anymore feel guilty about taking them to places. I mean, they want to take them to a place. If the place doesn't take them anymore, they're full. Then they're going to dump them. You know,
Yeah.
either keep them or kill them themselves or whatever. You know, or take them to. We
Yeah,
have
that's on the horizon for Philly. We're going to be a no-kill city.
They
They're
announced that,
working
but I
on
can't say
yeah.
that there's I haven't seen any change in. It's a long story.
Yeah, we need to combat. We need to deal with that, and we need to stop having
I have
people
ideas for this.
stop feeding them.
So I want
At
to
the very least.
tackle. We'll mention a couple more studies. And this is more on the again sort of critical of trap neuter release now. One is called The Evolution of Euthanasia and Trap Neuter Return Programs in Managing Free Roaming Cat Populations, published in Wildlife Research by Paige Schmidt, Todd Swanek, Roel Lopez, and Margaret Slater. Basically saying that at low immigration rates, euthanasia or trapping and removing is modeled to do better than trap neuter release. They have a discussion in there about places where TNR hasn't worked, which is worth mentioning because Alley Cat Allies won't tell you about where it's utterly failed. Just like any advocate, you're not going to go, oh, it didn't work over there. Miami-Dade parks, they talk about that it didn't seem to work. And then I'm going to segue right into the next one to save us some time. We have a big one in the criticism of TNR literature, if that's a thing, called The Analysis of the Impact of Trap Neuter Return Programs on Populations of Feral Cats by Patrick Foley, Janet Foley, again, Julie Levy, and Terry Paik. And so this is one which I put together with the Rome study in sort of tempering expectations for trap, neuter, and release programs in big cities sort of outside of a university campus, basically. So once you get out into bigger landscapes of cats, they were looking at sort of what are the characteristics in the age profile of cats being brought in by caretakers of outdoor cats, and sort of looking at those as indicators of what the population looks like. Correct me if I'm phrasing this wrong, but in a nutshell, that in San Diego and in Alachua County, actually, where Julie Levy did her study that we talked about being so famous, you still see similar proportions of intact and pregnant cats coming in that are being trapped, and that if you really wanted to get ahead of cat reproduction, you'd have to get something, but this is the number you'll see pop up a lot now, between 71 and 94% sterilization rates of the cat populations, and that's far greater than what they seem to be doing. And so it's sort of like, I don't know, sort of like these two studies are again backing up this idea that like it almost doesn't matter what you do, or kill them or don't kill them, partly if you keep feeding them outside, and then if you have people just breeding pet cats and dumping cats, then it's going to be really hard to get ahead of this.
They're sort of right in line with all of this, is in that we're just seeing the ineffectiveness of pretty much all of these things. If the goal is to reduce the number of cats, none of these things do that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it comes down to. None of these things seem to work.
Unless you can sort of draw boundaries around a place,
Right.
And
Right.
maybe a park is like that. If you have like a park where your rangers can range and they have,
Right.
and you can go out every Tuesday with your 22s and like pick off the cats, and then you just get that steady effort, and maybe then you can get ahead of it. But like in sort of the landscape of Philadelphia or something like that, like
Right.
good luck. You know?
Yeah, that's just it. I mean, as much as I'd like to turn Tony loose with the 22 and see what happens in West Philly, it would be
Pellet gun.
a pellet gun. Yeah, a pellet gun. It would. it's just not a practical solution. Is what it comes down to. Is that you've got to balance all of these other factors. I mean, one of the things that's interesting to me about all of this whole discussion is the notion of people feeding outdoor cats.
Yeah,
So
that's what we got to attack.
I mean, that's really a big issue here, because if you're gonna say that outdoor cats are a thing and you want them to be a thing, and you think that they're, I mean, as you said earlier, people view them as part of the ecosystem, and at this point they've become part of an urban ecosystem. They're part of it, good, bad, or otherwise, just like every invasive species or exotic species becomes.
Rats are part of our...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but the reality is that, for example, I love birds, but
Yeah.
I don't feed them because, to me, that's disrupting the natural. I don't feed them. The only time I feed them is when there's been snow cover on for more than a week, which never happens anymore. So I have a bag of moldy bird food in my basement because of that.
Well, I feed them
Mouse food for your
purely because I want to see them.
Yeah, right.
And I want to
I think in nature center you have a different argument. Like you want
Right.
to be able to show people the bird.
Yeah,
right. But studies have shown that they still always get the vast majority of their food from wild sources. You
Well,
know?
the other thing I don't like to do is I don't like to feed English sparrows.
Right, yeah.
Which is what, in my neighborhood, I'm feeding most of the time. And
Yeah.
because I would prefer to feed other songbirds, but I don't get to do that because of what's there. So
Yeah, you just never know when, like, people are feeding in suburban Reading. People had a feeder out, and the next thing you know, a blackback oriole, which should be no closer than central Mexico, showed up.
Now that I've read all this stuff and really gone through it more than I had before, and I look at sort of what are our goals and what are we trying to accomplish and what can we accomplish. I mean, part of me is like, I want every kid in every block to have a good chance to see interesting wildlife that could be here. I know, because I've seen a couple of them. Like I see even just like white-throated sparrows or juncos moving through the neighborhood and like hopping around near the ground. I'm like, man, that's total cat bait right there.
And when I first got to...
I want more of those.
Yeah, and to like take it like, another step. When I first got to Parks and Rec, I was really gung ho. I mean, I still am, but I was working in an area that had, in Wissahickon we had 3 sizable brushy meadows that we maintained. Bobwhite quail like that habitat during decline. I was thinking,
You get your people with dogs off leash. Sorry.
right, but I looked into that. It looks like the research says that dogs, to birds, it doesn't matter. A dog on a leash, off a leash, like
Just as scary.
yeah. It's to me. I looked into the literature on dogs off leash, and it looked like it's more like whether the presence or absence of dogs doesn't really matter whether on leash or not to the animals, and it's more like that to me is more of a human enjoyment impact rather than wildlife impact. I had that's an argument that I don't bring up when it comes to off leash dogs about the wildlife impact, because it doesn't seem like they have any impact on ground nesting birds. It's more like it's an impact on people's enjoyment. If you don't like, people are scared of a dog that off a leash. It doesn't matter if it's the best behaved dog in the world.
Dog-loving friends whose dogs are a little bit sensitive and don't
Exactly,
like
that's the issue there.
Yeah.
I got literature. I looked up to it. There's programs the Game Commission will provide you Bob White. Reintroduction. I said these areas might be perfect for Bob White. There's also the Erdenheim Meadow, Dixon Meadow in that Erdenheim. There's really big nearby. I was like, we could have maybe even, because Bob White in the winter where the forests open up, they'll range more. So maybe we could even have some dispersal into different areas. So I talked to our land, the national lands, and first thing he said was they'll get hammered by the cats.
Yeah.
It's like there's no point. They'll get, and he's right. Like, like the we're not far enough away from the houses, and the cats will get them, and there's no point.
You need your meadow with like a few hundred yards of forest buffer around
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
To keep the cats out.
We have to advocate for it, and I think and make it as much of a social justice argument as it is a wildlife argument.
Right.
That like we have a city full of kids who, we are not a wealthy city. Not everybody in the city can afford to like take their kids on vacations to Acadia National Park or even French Creek,
Yeah.
And so what you want is to have good biodiversity where Philadelphians can see it. And part of that is saying, okay, if you want to have your cat in your house, great. You want to have your cat in your alley, okay, we don't like it as much, but just keep the cats out of the places where Philadelphians have a chance to see some rich biodiversity.
And then the number 2 rabies vector in the state.
And that's the paper we didn't really get to, but like, that there's a whole there's an argument. I think it makes me a little nervous that on the one hand the cats, there are different vaccines, but generally like the cat rabies vaccine, you're supposed to get like a 1-year booster after the first vaccination, and then every 3 years after that. From what I see at the TNR programs, they'll vaccinate them once and not come back for them. You don't know that, and this is what we were talking about some other ones, that you don't necessarily trap all the cats that you're feeding or that are part of that little population. And then you're also feeding lots of wildlife, raccoons, skunks, foxes, that are rabies vectors.
Right.
So you're making this like, you're sort of concentrating your vectors.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're mingling, and plus it's, we don't want to get our wildlife accustomed to being fed.
Hey, podcast listeners, I'm going to drop in one more article here about the rabies risks of TNR and just in general of managed colonies. And this is by Roebling and a whole bunch of other authors. It's called Rabies Prevention and Management of Cats in the Context of Trap, Neuter, Vaccinate, Release Programs. Zoonoses and Public Health is the journal. We hope you enjoy it. It's from 2013.
But what I'm getting at is that I think I want to make more of a point of talking to my neighbors who feed cats and like, hey, please, I don't know if I can stop you from this, but understand that not everyone on the block is in favor of what you're doing. And also try to turn them on to say, hey, like, you might just think all we got is English sparrows out here, or house sparrows out here. Here's other stuff I see and I'd like to see more of.
Right.
But that to focus our efforts on the feeding in places that are particularly sensitive.
There's 2 things I want to make sure we talk about with you before you go.
Okay.
One is, you sound like you have an opinion about allies already.
Yeah.
But so what's your impression of
Oh,
allies?
it's the vacuum effect.
Yeah, well, their whole thing about the vacuum effect, which
Well, I mean, it's not wrong. There seems to be a vacuum effect in the sense that there just keeps being an influx of new cats into the system.
Yeah.
And that really seems to be the problem, right? Is
Yeah.
that, like I said, you turn off the spigot. But the analogy that you see with Chicago gun control is actually kind of similar, right? Chicago has really strict gun control laws, but Gary, Indiana doesn't.
I was gonna say,
right?
it doesn't.
And Gary's the problem, right?
Tennessee doesn't.
Yeah, right. No one around that.
Missouri doesn't.
Not just the city, not just it's it's not a statewide thing. It's just a citywide thing, and so there's an influx of weapons coming from there, and so I think it's a hard argument to make, especially when you have an N of 1, right? That's the other problem, and the other thing too is that the fact that cats are living on a first of all, what is a sub-Antarctica island?
This was islands that are in the southern
within the
Arctic or sub-Antarctic?
it said sub-Antarctica in that
sub-Antarctic
in that-
island.
Yeah.
This is
so-
the argument about an
About
island where
this
they
island where they killed
cats.
they tried to eradicate
It took
cats.
a lot
in
of
it.
effort.
Yeah.
But my point, they use it as an argument as why there's a vacuum effect. It's futile. It worked though. In the end, they did it.
It worked. You know why? Because there's no way for more to get in, and so you can't kill them. And that's, like I said, that's the problem.
But also
is
with the vacuum effect, if you reduce cats by adoption and by lowering the reproductive rate, wouldn't that create a vacuum effect just as much as
the problem,
reducing that?
the other problem that you have is that somebody has a cat, or they bring in a stray cat, and then they don't get the cat neutered or spayed, right? And then the cat gets out, or they let the cat out because it's an indoor-outdoor cat. It goes out, it gets bred by an alley cat, by a tom, and then it comes back, and then they have 8 kittens, and they don't know what to do with them. So what do? They put them back on the street.
Yeah.
And so it's just perpetuating. So the key here is not feeding outdoor cats,
Right.
and not putting out indoor cats outside. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Cats, if you want to have a pet, then be a responsible pet owner and keep your animal in the confines of your own home where its impact is limited to you and your guests and family, right? I mean, like I said, the analogy to my dogs, no one there's a dog that gets loose in our neighborhood literally once a week. And everybody gets annoyed with it because it comes into your yard and it will run up to your kids. And it's not a mean dog. It's a very friendly dog.
It's a little bit of a hassle.
But it is a hassle because it is nerve-wracking that you don't know that dog, right? I don't like dogs that I don't know very well. I mean, I don't like to encounter them in a non-controlled environment. And the thing about it is that, you know, there are cats running back and forth across my lawn routinely, and I know whose houses they belong to. So keep them indoors. They are impacting, and the research is pretty clear on this. Is that you just got to remove the influx because the other management techniques are going to be
Without that,
and I have to say that before 8:00 this morning, I had no idea of any of what the story would be. To be quite honest, and so I mean, it's an opinion that. You know, and I am all for preserving natural wildlife. I mean, that I do come at it from that side of it. So, because I think that nature does everything better than we ever will. But, and I have to say that the Alley Cats pamphlets are trash. I mean, they are propaganda at the highest form.
are.
I mean, they're bending the results of scientific studies, fake news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The problem is the well-financed fake news.
Yeah, I'm sure. Right. I mean, it's just like you commented before about
they've got their posters up there.
The Heartland Institute. Yeah.
Do they really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Heartland Institute mails me their annual reports every year. I get them in my mailbox unsolicited.
Yeah.
And then,
How'd you get on the, you wonder what mailing list was it that got you on that mailing
yeah,
list?
well, it's hard to tell.
Well, you're a climate change scientist.
Yeah. So, and they send them to our libraries. And thank God we have a great science librarian at St. Joe's because she throws them away. She literally, and it's funny because I was throwing them in.
It's all about the tilting of the axis.
Oh God! Well, I mean, yeah, Milankovitch cycling. Yeah. Yes, that's true. That's the unfortunate part of that is that every good lie has some truth in it, right? That's the problem. Is the Milankovitch cycling actually does impact climate, and we have gone into ice ages because of it. But that's not what's happening now.
Yeah,
yeah, and we know that. But I actually was throwing those in the garbage one day when I got them, and John Braverman, one of my colleagues, said, "Aren't you going to put those in the recycling bin?" And I was like, I don't want any chance of these things ever resurfacing again. But I'm burying them in the trash heap for once and for all here. But yeah.
So guys, the one thing I'll say about the vacuum effect pamphlet is that it doesn't look much at house cat vacuum effect.
Right.
It takes a lot of other animals that have, let's say, mountain lions, and sort of applies mountain lion ecology to house cats.
Well, I think we should run with that. I think we should take them up on that, what their point, and we should study mountain lions with augmented feeding. We should
Put out deer carcasses.
Yeah, we should feed mountain lions and see if they're popular and see how that works. You know what I mean? Like we should look at the populations where you dump extra mountain lions and you supplemental feed them and compare that with areas where they're removed.
Yeah.
You know, like that. Yeah. Like that's let's make it like.
There was some sad news about Eastern mountain lions just last week. 2 weeks ago, it came out. They've basically been declared extinct.
Yeah, which is interesting because I'm curious about the timing of that. I understand that 50 years is the mark if an animal.
Yeah.
But like, now we're getting more and more mountain lion sightings. There was that one that was
Iowa.
Yeah. Well, they know that they're established in the Upper Midwest, and that and they looked at the DNA on those, and they're related to the Black Hills population. So they clearly moved east, and they found some in there was cabin traps and some hares.
They're coming.
Yeah. And then one was killed,
Well, I certainly hope they make it back. I don't think they will because they have such a large territorial area that they need to. When I was a kid in West Virginia,
Allegheny Plateau, you could have some.
Yeah, no, but that's it. So this was probably 90, 89, 88, between 88 and 90. Yeah, I think so because we had a cabin in the West Virginia. Yeah, yes, a lot of deer. my grandfather had a cabin in the mountains in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, and we would go up on Friday nights, and so we'd have to go up on a mountain about halfway up it to a spring to get our water for the cabin because we didn't have running water in it. And we were sitting there one night, and he was loading. We had old milk cans, which tells you how old all of this is. We had old milk cans that we filled with water, and then we put them in the back of the truck, and I threw them in. And my grandfather stayed in the back of the truck to relieve himself, but we had the lights on shining up the road from the spring, and I jumped back in the cab of the truck, and I saw eyes below the road, so it was cut in the mountainside, so it was a steep drop on this side, it cut the road, and it was probably a lane and a half. It was a gravel road cut into the side of the mountain, and there's a set of eyes low on the low side. Fully expected it to be a deer that was just going to pop up over the road, and I'm sitting there, and my grandfather coughed, and when he coughed, it jumped out off the lower side of the road and when it did, it cleared the entire road, damn near the entire road. In my mind, I have it not touching the gravel, but I don't know if it did that. But when it stretched out, it was a large cat. It was definitely a large cat. Could have been a bobcat, but it seems so much bigger than that to me.
I know, but when you're at nighttime.
It was night and it was far away, so it could have been a bobcat. I've seen bobcats, but male bobcats can get really pretty big. I don't think people realize how big they get. But it could have been a bobcat. But that area was known for spottings of mountain lions because there was an old rock quarry that they had dug limestone out. Yeah. So there was the old timers had tales of these mountain lions using those quarries, but I always wanted it to be that, but I've never been able to confirm it, and that's the problem is that all of these sightings are anecdotal. It's just like the Ivory-billed woodpecker, right? Yeah. I mean, like people were seeing those for ages.
Yeah, why is it never the DNR staff that sees them?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. The people that are out there trying to find them.
It's interesting. My friends, I don't even remember this guy's name, but my friends, a fair number of punk rockers moved to Philly from Arkansas for some reason. And so I knew a bunch of kids from Arkansas.
It's well known. It's punk rock migration.
Yeah. And
anything's better than Arkansas.
And you hear these, people tell you stories and you're like, yeah, I don't believe it. But do you remember when the Metro, the free newspaper, used to have an animal story every week? In it, every day was a little animal story. They stopped doing it. But my friend told me a story of how his friend was the guy who found evidence of mountain lions in Arkansas, and he's a big cat expert out there, and that's been verified
that's a real thing.
That there's a population. Yeah. He told me a story of how his friend was asked. There was a security camera on a culvert, and they saw what they saw were two mountain lions. So they sent him I don't know if he went to them, they went to him, whatever. He went to review the evidence, review the tape.
Yeah.
And he was like, "This isn't mountain lions; these are African lions." Right? And I always heard a story, and then I saw
they got out
in the Metro and said in Arkansas, 2 African lions were found, and I guess they killed them to get them out of there. But there. So apparently someone
they had gotten released.
Yeah, had a
one of these
the fact
homemade
that
zoos.
His pets just drives me.
Yeah, and there's
who in their right mind would do that? I mean, that's an animal that can kill you in a matter of seconds.
So my whole world is reptiles and amphibians. I can go online right now, order you up a whole bunch of cobras if you want. It'll be delivered to your house.
My friend is animal control.
That's literally my worst nightmare. I am not a hurt guy at all. At all.
So my friend's an animal cop in we should interview him some one of these days. In Austin, right? Yeah, and he I think I talked to him. He said he doesn't think he has enough wildlife stories, but he responded, and this is in the news. He responded to a guy who committed suicide by cobra.
Cleopatra.
He met his cobra. He got his cobra. He got in his car with his cobra and it killed him. And then the cobra got loose, and it got ran over. Luckily for society, not for the cobra. But how crazy is that?
That's sad.
I thought what you were going with the gun analogy was the fact that most of the anti-gun literature is from medical doctors, and most of the pro-TNR stuff is from vets. And my whole thing, and tell me what your impression is. I disagree with what you said. No. What I'm asking you, I'm asking to be. This is something I think I want to say outside my head and be open up to criticism. What's your take on, I studied under you, and the next step for me would be get a PhD. So you learn, you learn how to perform research, right? But vet schools and med schools are essentially trade schools. You're not trained to be a research scientist in the same kind of way.
That's not true. I would say that's not true. I mean, there are academic scholarly medical doctors.
Pediatrician.
Yeah, I mean, most of the staff at most of the MDs employed by the hospital, University of Pennsylvania, are also researchers doing real research, and many, a high concentration of them here have both PhDs and MDs. In fact,
or MPHs as well.
Right, exactly. That Julie Levy is a DVM PhD, so she's got a dual degree. So she's done both. But I would say it's fine, and I would also say that there's not. I didn't see nothing. I almost expected some of these papers to be total crap and just the way that they were performed. And I don't do this kind of research with mark recapture and things like that, but I mean, I've studied those in plenty of ecology classes through the years, and all of it seemed pretty legit. Their numbers were good, and so I think that they're okay. But that doesn't mean you can't tell a story.
I think the part for me that I jump on in that is more call it the sociological angle of it. I don't know that their goals are going to be a little different. I mean, if you're coming at this if you're a wildlife ecologist or something like that, or an ecologist, whatever, that your focus is broader. If you're someone who's coming out of a veterinary school, and why you went into this and what you do is taking care of people's pets, you're going to have a very different viewpoint of those animals and look at them differently, and your goals for those animals are going to be different than if you're an ornithologist, or if you're a wildlife educator, environmental educator, like you are, like I am by hobby, that we have a what we define as what's important is broader than if you're a small animal vet, and your passion is the health and lives of cats.
No, I think the other thing is that these papers do lean towards somewhat of activism in a little bit, in some ways. Like that statement in the Italian abstract is somewhat inappropriate, right? Yeah. I mean, like, it's not really for you, in my opinion, and this is, although I'm moving in the opposite direction of my own thoughts on this now, is that, we objectively put data out there, and then policymakers use that data. Theoretically, that's how government and society should work, but unfortunately, in the United States right now, we're not doing that as much. But that's for them to decide, and actually. That's been a big discussion that's happened in my community for the last few years. It's like where do we start? And Michael Mann is one of them who's really moved. He's at Penn State,
you feel so neutral on this guy.
Like eventually we have to be like, hang on a second, you're missing the point here, right? That we need to move in this direction. But I mean, like all the time. I mean, Scott Pruitt has said just recently made comments about how climate change is probably going to be good for planet Earth because, humans do better under a warmer world, and more CO2 is going to produce more vegetation and increase agricultural productivity and all this stuff. And one of the things,
oceans are way too basic.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that really just like chaps my ass hardcore is that some of that's my data. Like my dissertation was on the response of photosynthesis to CO2, and most of the time it goes up a lot. Which is an argument for it, right? Is that if that's your goal, but the problem is that it's the giant storms and sea level rises that we have to really think about too.
So actually, I want to wrap this. I want to ask you about one more paper study I heard about. So thank you for listening to this episode of the Urban Wildlife Podcast. By this point, you might have discovered that I've chopped this into 2 episodes because we got a couple hours of tape on this. So thank you for listening to part 2 of our dive into the cat literature. And if you like this episode, please rate us highly on your podcast listening platform of choice. Please tell your friends about it. Please get in touch with us at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com or urbwildlifecast on Twitter. Clint, thank you very much for joining us for a dive into something that's not your job.
Yeah, and if you think of, I've been talking to you about having you on the podcast for a long time.
Yeah.
But if you know,
let's talk about plants at some point.
anytime you want to, talk about, next time when we have another plant related content, we'll get you on. And if you also you have something that you want to talk about, urban plant related.
The park you're working on in Ardmore, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So with that, thanks a lot for listening.